now call to order the regular meeting dated Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. I'd like to remind everyone to silence their phones and any other electronic device they may have. If you would like to speak on one of the agenda items tonight, please fill out one of the blue slips in the back of the room and turn it in to Miss Jessica up here in the front. This time we'll have the Pledge and Allegiance by Mr. Breen.
God, we just love you. We thank you for this day. We just thank you for all the many blessings that you lay upon each and every one of our lives, Father. We just thank you for this time that we have to take care of the business of the parish, Father. And we just ask that you give us wisdom and just let us use discernment, Father, on the decisions we make. And that the decisions we make please you. We ask all these things in the Christ Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Breen.
Yes, sir.
Roll call, Ms. Cathy.
Yes, sir. Mr. Abshire?
Here.
Mr. Endricott?
Here.
Mr. Barris?
Here.
Mr. Breen?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farnham?
Here.
Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Guillory? Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Vice President Mayo?
Here.
Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimming? Here. And President White.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Before I go to number 4, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight in the audience. Moving to item 4, take appropriate action on applications for liquor and beer permits. Mr.
Second.
Crane is not here. Ms. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. President. We do have one special event permit before you tonight, and we recommend approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? Item 4 carries. Thank you, Ms. Wallace. 5, consideration of approving payment on all current invoices and advised regular monthly budget to actual comparisons. I have a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? 6 carries. Item 7, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application, 5700 block of Cormier Road. 6, my bad. Consideration of approving minutes from a regular meeting of police jury dated March 21st, 2019. I have a motion by Ms. Trimmie and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objection? 6 carries. Move on to these rezoning cases. I need a motion to approve or deny rezoning from starting at number 7. Consideration of adopting the ordinance approving the following rezoning application, 5700 block of Cormier Road in Ward 7, rezone from light industrial at I-1 and agriculture A1 to multifamily resident RM to allow residential development 41 duplexes. I have a motion to deny rezoning by Mr. Bears and a second by Mr. Farnham. Do we have any discussion? I know we have the applicant here that would like to speak. I'd ask the fellow jurors to hold all comments until the very last speaker. If you have a question, please ask your questions, but please hold all comments to the very last speaker.
Mr. President,
Name and
members
address
of the
for the
jury.
record, please.
Yes, my name is Tom Gale. I'm here on behalf of the applicant today. My address is 713 Kirby Street in Lake Charles. I am asking, requesting that you please overturn the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission from Monday night. This is a project that is a logical transitional phase between a residential area and a commercial area. It currently enjoys, the vast majority of this project has industrial zoning right now. As an industrially zoned site, as an industrial zone site, as of right, y'all know all the limits they have, they can go through and get developed. Everything that we have from every commercial classification that's there, this is actually a request to downgrade that zoning to allow this particular development. Monday night, we had a lot of concerns about drainage and it is a legitimate concern. However, drainage is an engineering issue. And these two men sitting back here are ready to use a new drainage ordinance, and they're going to make sure that whatever gets approved is going to have a zero off-site impact. And this will be one of the first developments coming in under the new drainage ordinance. And y'all passed that drainage ordinance to address issues exactly like this. And it's an issue that is ripe for development, that is going to move forward for development. It is at the corner of the interstate, and it is going to be developed into something at some point in time. And so while drainage is a legitimate concern, it's a concern for everybody, because the developer who wants to do this owns the RV park and the truck stop. And they certainly don't want to do anything that's going to impair or affect negatively any of their remaining property. As far as traffic goes, there are some alternatives as far as access for traffic. One of the concerns is if they go either through the existing developments or if they go directly to the west, you're not going to create a traffic queue. By coming out on Cormier Road, you're going to have more place to stack the cars. That's one of the things that we run into with DOTD in certain areas. They don't want to put a bunch of cars on the interstate at one time, but it's certainly an alternative we're glad to discuss if that's an option. As far as the nature of the development, again, it's intended to be site-built properties. He wants to preserve the value. He has interest in preserving the value, and the staff has recommended it because it does make a logical transition from what we have on the truck stop areas down into the homes and the farms of the existing community. Glad to answer any questions.
Any of the jurors have any questions for Mr. Gale? Mr. Landry?
I do. So it is possible, since he owns all of that property, that the ingress and egress could go somewhere else besides on that road, or?
Correct.
So
If need
that
be,
is
it could go due west.
If DOT or whoever allows you to do that, I know you
Correct.
wouldn't know, but. So what you proposed, or what was turned in, was using the, I guess, what is it, Cormier Road?
Correct.
But
The idea was to do the water detention in the center of the development and then use Cormier as the ingress and egress, so as not to go through and to overcrowd the interstate and the intersections.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Okay, a question. The owner of this property, is it the same person that owns the RV park?
Yes.
Because I do have some concerns when it comes to standards of what that RV park actually looks like when you drive by it.
Okay.
So I would just be concerned that without some better stipulations to make sure this didn't turn into, something, I know it's an RV park right next to the interstate, but now we'd be talking about maybe having that same type of place with 41 duplexes. That would be one of my concerns. So.
Glad to work out some stipulations for some minimum design standards.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Guidry?
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Gill, this 6-foot privacy fence would encompass the entire?
Correct, just so that they don't interfere with the drainage lateral.
Okay.
And so we'd have servitudes that are going to be granted in favor of gravity drainage whenever we have a board in place. But certainly between the areas of the development and the existing properties.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further questions for Mr. Gill? Thank you, Mr. Gill. We do have some speakers on this. Ms. Debbie,
And Mr. President, as the first speaker comes up, I don't know how many cards we've got turned
you
in.
have a total of 4.
I would
Yeah.
suggest 3 minutes, is that
3
fair?
minutes.
3 minutes per speaker?
3 minutes per speaker.
Thank you.
Sorry, ma'am, for not saying your last name, because I didn't want to mess that up. But name
That's
and
why I
record for the
assumed it
address,
was
please.
me. Yes, my name is Debbie McElhannon. I live at 5455 Henderson Road, which is right around the corner from where the proposed site is. My concerns are the infrastructure. It's not conducive to the additional housing. The additional traffic with the already small roads would make it very difficult for the traffic. We already can't get on the internet to complete homework. My boys sometimes have to stay at school to do their homework. I have to stay late at work because I can't get on the internet because of all the additional RVs and stuff in the area. We just don't have the access to be able to get on. I often have to stay late. I have soldiers who, when they travel, they call me because I'm over their government travel cards, turning them on and off. When they are stranded away from home, I've had to leave my house in the middle of the night to be able to go turn their cards on and get them home, because I can't get on the internet or my phone sometimes because of the additional traffic in the area already, and this additional housing would make it worse. No matter what drainage they're saying they're going to put in, the area it already has an issue with the water levels, and the area where this is going in helped keep the houses from flooding, like during Harvey, because all the additional water went to this area. With additional housing on the area that they're putting the homes in, it would cause the water levels to go up higher. Increased housing will also make it harder for current residents who keep their properties secure with all the additional personnel or people moving in. That's all I have.
Do you have any questions? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next one is Mr. Danny Benoit. Name and address for the record, please. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Danny Benoit. I live at 5720 Cormier Road, Benton, Louisiana. And I just like to say that I have pictures, I don't know if y'all have them or not, of the last time we had a flood in that area, and it shows that entire area flooded where they're wanting to build. And that's where the water went to. The ditches right now do
Excuse me, sir.
not...
Dan, can you pass those around, please? Sorry about that.
The ditches right now are, the culverts and everything are plugged, they're all grown up, and the water that normally drains to the east backs all the way up and flows into where they're planning to put these houses, duplexes. Second of all, they say that this is housing that fits into that area. There's approximately 10 to 12 houses on Cormier Road. It's about a half a mile or so long. There is no duplexes or multifamily houses anywhere in any part of the Toomey area that I know of, and I've lived there since I was 2 years old. Second, there's so much traffic now from that RV park, and that the fact that they park cars and they use that when the interstate is slightly jammed, they route all of the buses and cars down Cormier Road. They do that regularly. There's 2 lots, one that parks by the old Delta Downs, and then one parks at on the old Delta Downs Hotel, and one that parks at the Longhorn. So the traffic every single day is so bad that you can't leave your house until approximately 6:30 or 7 o'clock unless you want to get hung up. The main thing is, if they build 42 duplexes there, after all the work in this area goes away, what's it going to turn into? It'll end up being Section 8 housing out there in the country. That's mostly out there right now is hay fields, some houses, and some cow pastures, and I just don't think that fits out there. The infrastructure is an also issue. I am president of Ward 7, District 10 Water Board, and there is no public water south of Interstate 10. It's not even on the north side of Interstate 10 at this current time. That would be phase 3 of getting the water across and under Interstate 10, and that's not going to happen for another 3 to 5 years probably. So I wonder what they're going to do to get supply of water for 42 duplexes. That's all I have.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Benoit? Thank you, sir. Mr. Philip Parker. Name and address for the record.
Philip Parker. I live at 5576 Mott Road. Before they ever even built the RV park there, we had flooding issues. Well, they dug a very deep ditch going back to the north of Mott Road. Well, the last couple of years since the RV park has been built, the water flows over the top of Mott Road because it can't get out to the south, which from my house would flow south and then back to the west on Cormier. My deal is the flooding issue. I mean, once the water goes over Cormier Road, It comes all the way up my driveway, then it fills up my yard.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Parker? No? Thank you, sir. Mr. Bob
Jessica.
Lishman?
My name is Bob Lishman. I live at 5654 Cormier Road. Not much I can say other than what's already been said is I've worked in this area as a service man, and I've seen a lot of apartment complexes be built, and after a few years, they tend to not want to keep the maintenance up on them, and they wind up being Section 8 housing. And being out here in the country where there's nothing close to us, the parish is probably going to have to wind up having a bus service into Sulphur so people get into the stores and stuff they need to get into. As far as the flooding issues, I've been out there for over 30 years, and I've had over 3 to 4 inches in my yard at times. And the pictures that been sent to you show that the last rain we had with, I think it was about 3 to 4 inches, it flooded quite a bit of that area out there. So the drainage is a big problem for it. And most of us have moved out there because we wanted to get out of the cities. We wanted, you know, someplace quiet. And if this goes in, it's going to change the whole dynamics of the whole area.
Sir, do we have any questions for Mr. Rick? Thank you, sir. We have one last speaker, Mr. Randy Abear. Name and address for the record, sir.
Randy Abear, 706 Live Oak Street, Sulphur, Louisiana. And, you know, hearing it on the outside, I didn't get to hear the zoning and stuff, and it sounds like it's probably something that worthwhile project. But whenever we talk about drainage, the first thing he did says, I got an engineer. My question's simple. Well, what kind of track record are our engineering doing when it comes to managing our drainage problems? I'm very familiar with Belle Savant. That's something that we dealt with in the Sulphur, and y'all know y'all didn't deal with it, but they built the one plan, survived a heavier rain event, and so to me the project did pretty good, even though it was under-engineered. But what is the parish seeing? Are the engineering meeting our expectation for zero, how do you say it, zero effect runoff? Real simple, I mean, surely somebody knows. I know we got a lot of things coming down the line as far as, and changes as far as drainage is concerned. But that's my one question. How good are their numbers? Because it's all about numbers.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Aber? Thank you, Mr. Aber. All right, we do have a couple jurors would like to speak. Mr. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we visited this subject a year ago, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it met with unanimous decision that this was a bad project location. It's not a bad project, it's a bad location. The land use in that area, there's no such thing as a transition between one zoning and the next zoning when you cram 160 vehicles, approximately, is 41 duplexes, which is, you know, about 80 residents, and 2 cars per resident. It's about 160 cars that you're going to put out on a very, very rural road. I'm not sure, a question for Tim, that this road was built to some minimal standards, probably back when, who knows when it was built. And then it was overlaid, so it's probably not built to any kind of standards that would sustain this kind of traffic. at that point. I don't know if you care to comment on that.
Mr. Farnham, I can. As far as the pavement thicknesses, I believe that we would be okay. But the shoulder widths and things of that sort certainly doesn't meet the current design standards of what we would build it to today. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, but based on traffic, trips generated, I can't quote you what the duplex generation is, but I know for a residential home, it's about 10 trips per day per home. So that give you an idea of the kind of traffic it would generate.
So there was a concern brought up by DOTD that we don't dump that many cars right next to the interstate, and probably as if you measure out the road, it's maybe 2 to 3 miles of actual road that get back to where the new exit would be, which puts you right in the middle of the 6 to 8 houses that exist out there today, with very large tracts of land around each one of them, and which makes that real rural community look going to change everything about that. I think it's a great project. It's just a horrible location, and we all agreed a year ago that it was a horrible location and turned it down, and now we're back. There's nothing changed from last year to this year, other than we've just waited a calendar year per requirement, and then we're right back making the same decision again. The drainage situation, when we get into rebuilding the site to meet the standards that we have today, when that place holds every bit of the water that comes in on a heavy rainfall, it's got to be displaced to go somewhere. And it's likely going to get displaced on every one of the neighbors that exist around there. So somebody's got to hold all that water. They can't hold it all in the detention pond. It's going to run off, and it's going to shed to the neighbors. I just think it's a bad location, and I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. President. About half of that was not correct. Once he goes through the engineering phase of this, even though he's proposing 41 or whatever, he may end up with 20. He is going to have a zero impact on the drainage. Zero. That's the ordinance that's been passed. I think you voted against it, but that's what was passed. Is that correct? Go ahead, Mr. Wainwright, since...
No doubt this site, Mr. Landry, will require a runoff management plan, and I think that in that process, impact due to increased runoff would be mitigated and managed through our, they'd be forced to do detention. I think there's one critical issue with this site that sort of pops up when I looked at it a little earlier, is that unfortunately this site lies just outside of the 100-year floodplain. It's one of these areas I would probably suggest that the flood maps are inaccurate. Reason being, just south of Cormier Road, the 100-year floodplain elevation is 10 foot. The average land elevation on this site's below 9 foot. It's 9 foot, maybe 8.85, somewhere in there. So it's hard to believe that water would be at the elevation of 10 foot south of Cormier Road and not be flooding this site. We would assume that this site floods, just like everyone who stepped up here and says. The problem with it is our field mitigation ordinance is for properties inside the floodplain. So technically, he may be able to fill this entire site without being required to do field mitigation because of an error in the flood maps. And that's one thing I would like to point out about. That's not a decision maker, but it definitely is an issue. Would have to be
You would
worked
look
at.
at that whenever...
We would look at that. I think the problem we would have as a staff would be dealing with it. I'm not sure we would have an ability to add policy at that point. Night during stipulations you might want to consider if you can deal with that issue if it's passed.
But it is true that even though he's proposing X number of units, that may not be what he ends up with at the end.
There's no doubt that during the process of engineering, if the
the pond needs to be bigger or something needs to be larger, that he would may offer to adjust his lots to accommodate the drainage. But again, we may not have the enough ordinance because of the boundaries of your ordinance, which are in the floodplain for field mitigation. He wouldn't be asked to do mitigation on this site, and that would ultimately shrink the size of that pond a little bit and allow that entire piece of land to be filled in.
Okay, there was another comment earlier about the internet service, and I hope we all know that having those RVs right there and everybody on the internet's not gonna affect the internet. We may have an internet service problem, but it's not because there's 50 houses or users around that. That does not cause that. The worst comments that were made was about Section 8, and I'm gonna tell you, that should have been shut down. Because how somebody pays for their rent doesn't make them a bad person. And somebody that's broke and poor are not bad people. So, and I have a problem when somebody gets up to that microphone and they say that in a negative way and insinuate, oh, it's going to turn into Section 8, and that's a bad thing. Well, you know what? I know a lot of people's on Section 8, and I'd rather have them living next door to me than some other very wealthy people that I know, without a doubt. There's no place for that here. That should have never been set up there.
Mr. Landry.
I would make, and I'm not done.
All righty.
I'm going to make a motion, if this ends up passing, that the road is built to where the traffic will exit a different way, with the exception of it not being Cormier Road. I'm assuming earlier the applicant stated that that could be done, and also that when it comes to the drainage study, that they will work with the staff at the staff's recommendation and not necessarily go only by the maps. And I know I probably didn't word that correctly, but you know what I mean, and Sam Gabb can figure it out.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Guidry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Help me some clarification, Mr. Wainwright, or even Ms. Wallace. Wasn't some of this area rezoned for the mega site that was being looked at? Wasn't that something that we did as a jury a while back?
In the Vinton area, yes. You
Yes.
did rezone
And
about 12,000 acres.
With this site being proposed, won't there be a need for housing, Ms. Wallace?
I would believe so, that the Vinton area would definitely be in a dire need of housing as that grows.
Okay. And thank you, Ms. Wallace. I just wanted to be clear on that because I remember that from a while back. The comment that Mr. Landry made, that was made about Section 8, I'm totally appalled that that comment was even made. Because we don't do business like that up here. We don't look at a person's social, economic, as to determine if they're even worthy of being able to be put somewhere. And I'm gonna say here tonight that I'm totally for the project, because we're up here to help people. We're not up here to discriminate against anybody, or because of where you live, or because of who you are as a person. So I'm just taken back a little bit that that comment was even made. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Guidry. Mr. Breen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Wallace, this question is for you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the property zoned light industrial right now
And agricultural, yes.
and agricultural.
Yes,
Okay, so
it's about half and
can
half.
you just, for my information, I kind of know, but just, and maybe some other people's information, can you let me know what by right now they can do with the light industrial?
A lot.
A lot, just some,
Pretty much any commercial use, which would include restaurants, bars, shopping centers. As far as industrial uses, you could do some manufacturing, sandblasting, welding shops, lay down yards, all those things by right.
Gentlemen's Club.
say it again?
Art Gentlemen's Club.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, that helps me, I just, because, you know, what they're requesting, 41 duplexes, multifamily, you know, there could be, I'm looking at it being already zoned right now, light industrial. I'm looking at it, you know, it could be a lot of things there, a lot worse than 41 duplexes. And that's just my reason for asking the question, so thank you.
Understand.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Bears?
Could I get Mr. Hafer, the folks in the back, to pull up the LiDAR mapping? That one right there. Okay, what we're looking at, folks, that's a LiDAR map, okay? LIDAR. Highest points are the lightest points, okay? Darkest points are the lowest points. See where that square, that little rectangle kind of square is right there where this property is? Note what color that is. See where all the water's going on that ladder, along that lateral. It is very important to me, not just for this, you know, just the surrounding people right directly here, but from where all that water travels from, okay? We made a commitment to have our drainage better, smarter, be way out front, and think about way down the road as far as our drainage goes and watershed management. You know, like I said, if you just isolate it right there, you don't really get it, but you know, where's it all coming from? Where's that water coming from? And then where's it gonna sit now? Apparently a bunch of water sits there. You saw the pictures. So where's it gonna sit now? You got all these people around there. You just go to their yards, I don't know. But, you know, again, that's not a land use issue, but I just wanted to bring this up because that says a lot, okay? You gotta be above water to be able to use the land. So, I would hope if this ends up passing, I hope that we have check valves in place to monitor this. And like Mr. Landry said, you know, he may not get the 41. Another thing that I'm worried about is right now we're in a transition. We just did the consolidation of drainage districts. So, you know, my kind of fear is who's gonna be blessing this. You know, is it the drainage board that's there now, or is it the drainage board we just appointed? You know, for the west side. You know, and you know we need to make sure that we have all those I's dotted and T's crossed on that. But you know, I can't say anything more than what's already been said. Again, I understand this is land use, but I think there's some extenuating circumstances in here that make it a little bit more. So I yield back, sir.
Mr. Bears, Mr. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Anybody that knows anything about internet service knows that the use of the bandwidth is directly proportional to your service. The more people that use that bandwidth, the slower the speed gets. It's a fact. It's a fact. The drainage, since the map shows all the blue in that one area, how does our drainage ordinance deal with? I know when you develop a site, they have to have zero impact of the runoff of their property. So since this property is a holder of water for everybody's property in that area, how does our ordinance even address that?
Well, first off, there's two things that our ordinance tries to address when it comes to a site like this. A, the drainage of the water. So first thing will happen is all the water that would hit on site obviously has to be collected and probably routed through a pond. I see one on their site plan. It'll also be required to account for off-site drainage that flows through this property. So that allows for the water to pass through the property. Like I said, where I see
the potential issue with your ordinances as they are today, which is just a factor of the FEMA maps. We tied field mitigation, which is the requirement where if you fill in the floodplain, you're required to put it back somewhere on your site. You balance it out. This site is in the 500-year floodplain, but not in the 100-year floodplain as I see it, and that's really just a map issue. It clearly is below from a ground elevation, below the elevation of what the 100-year flood would be. So we would not have, without a stipulation, I think, the ability to require them to mitigate any new fill brought on this site. And again, I've only had about a day to look at this and think about it, so it may come clearer in looking at more detail, but I think that's where we would stand. You know, the good news is we would be allowed to let that water pass through, but we would lose all that storage in the system more than likely if they chose to fill this site in. And that, you know, is what we're fighting at from a watershed level. Every site counts incrementally, saving our floodplain. Whether FEMA says it's in a floodplain or not is what we're after.
Yeah, so when you look at this development, I know this is just a tentative layout. Yeah, it has a nice little holding pond in the middle that only takes in the water from this development. I don't see any kind of inlets that come from the outlying areas. That it looks like this whole piece of property where this development is going to go is basically a detention pond for that region over there. And you know, I don't see any way that this can be done and have any houses on that property without building it up to a point to where you're going to displace water on all the neighbors all the way around.
Well, at this point, of course, this is just a conceptual plan, and maybe there's more information to be learned as you got further. It's hard to, like, this is just a concept at this point. No detailed engineering plans have been prepared or offered because we're at the zoning part of this. But, you know, those kind of details would definitely have to be incorporated into the final design of the project.
You know, when it comes to land use, there's things that are very obvious and there's things that aren't. And to me, this is extremely obvious that this is a horrible site for this. There's too many obstacles, too many things that are going to have to be done to make this a viable site for this development. And you can head it off at the pass, or you can hope for the best at the end of the day, which I don't think is going to turn out well for anybody. The folks' comments on Section 8, you know, I agree that if the intent was to single out the people that would live in a Section 8, it's not good. A lot of times people's worry about Section 8 is with how the development looks over time, because in most cases, whoever's investing in that property is going to put minimal money back into the property. So it ends up degrading over time, and that's more the worry, I believe, of what people are worried about when that type of development is next to them. It's not the people in there, because everybody's got to have a place to live. I agree with that 100%. A year ago, it was a unanimous vote that this was a bad location, and I fail to see any difference between last year and this year other than 365 days. I rest.
Mr. Scott.
I'll yield for a minute.
Mr. McMillan.
Thank you. I want to tell my fellow jurors, thank you for your debate, because when we come up here, we're charged with not having our mind made up. And from this debate, I could lean one way and I could lean another way. There's a lot of good debate going on. Thank you for what you're doing, because we are trying to make the right decision up here, and we take it very seriously. With that being said, I'd like to call Jennifer back up to the microphone. Ms. Wallace, staff recommended this. Can you give me some reasons why staff recommended this?
Well, a lot of the reasons have already been mentioned. We do see it as a transitional type area because of the density of the RV park and the cabins. It's close to the interstate, the mega site rezoning. definitely played a part in the recommendation and knowing that there was going to be a need for housing in the future.
And look, those are very good points, but then when you listen to and see the LiDAR, it makes me very nervous with we are in a watershed situation and, you know, are we creating a worse problem in the runoff and what it would do to the neighbors? So this is a tough decision. I yield, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. Gilreath.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to apologize for being late to my fellow jurors and everyone. I didn't hear everything, but Jennifer, from the place next door, it looks like what is about 50 trailers, 50 RV about?
I don't have the exact number. I'm not sure if Mr. Gale knows right offhand, but I believe there's more than that.
They probably could do the same thing with this property if he wanted to, right?
They would have to come to you for a rezoning. All of that property where the RVs and the cabins are has been rezoned in the years past.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Vanderpont.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to summarize a little bit what Mr. Fornum and Mr. Landry said. I think Mr. Fornum was spot on when he said nothing has changed from last year. And Mr. Landry was right on also about the Section 8. I think that was an appropriate statement to make. Whether it was meant to be demeaning, I don't know that. Ms. Wallace also stated that multiple businesses could be constructed on that piece of property. I know that people are concerned about the flooding, and that's the problem that I have is the flooding. But for those who are anti or for, it doesn't make any difference. It is zoned light industrial. So be careful what you ask for. You might just get it. I yield back.
Mr. Latour.
Gail, could you come up, please, if you don't mind? How many acres is the proposed site, just out of curiosity?
About 12 or 13.
12 or 13? And you were talking about having another exit. Could you, I see with this map, were you talking about going through the, is that a gas station or?
Correct. The same property owner has now purchased a gas station. And so one of the things I was going to add, I do have the authority to stipulate both to the flooding for Mr. Wainwright and to alternative access for Mr. Landry, that if we can get approval from whatever agency has control over that corridor to go to the west, we'll go to the west and not use the southern access as access into that neighborhood. And if they'll approve us to do it, then we'll certainly do it.
Okay. Could you put back up the site plan, please? Yeah, see, you said the total piece of property was 13 acres?
Is the pond just 13 acres?
Yeah, the pond's 13 acres. That's where I was kind of confused.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The whole property is 13 acres? Yeah, it's 13. It's just written as an overlay of the pond.
Okay, okay. So I guess the big issue is everybody is speaking of is drainage, and this is completely probably overstepping, but would y'all be willing to over-engineer to the pond to suffice some of the drainage issues that we're having?
We'll go above the minimum standards, and we'll go to the 100-year plain. And honestly, one of the things that y'all are describing here is that this is regional detention, this is regional detention. There's a phrase that Mr. Gabb and I call, and that's called expropriation. And if you insist on using this or not letting somebody develop it for the purpose of holding water and having detention for the regional property, that's a taking. And y'all spent a small fortune on Louisiana Avenue along with the city to accommodate that. And y'all didn't just tell those group of owners and said, oh, by the way, we're not gonna let you develop it, you're just gonna leave it undeveloped so you can hold the water for everybody else.
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about. And so granted, this is just a conceptual design, it's land use, and y'all all know what happens is once we get into engineering, this may not even be a viable project. We just don't know, but it doesn't make sense to go spend $100,000 on a drainage impact analysis whenever you come back and say, well, I'm sorry, you can't get zoned. So this is just the first step is to determine whether or not it's even feasible. But we can certainly stipulate to the 100-year plain. We can stipulate to an alternative access. And one of the things that Mr. Barres was worried about is gravity drainage. And planning and zoning requires a developer to go either get the approval from gravity drainage or get an answer from them as to why you can't get approved. And so we will stipulate that we will take any plans that might come forward and get them to whatever gravity drainage entity exists at the time, whether it's the new board that's up in existence, or if there's a de facto board or whatever happens.
So y'all pretty much willing to get any kind of standards to be able to do the development?
Absolutely.
If not, if it's not viable, you're just not gonna do it?
That's exactly right.
Well, I feel for the residents, and I will say thank you all for at least willing to do whatever it takes to make it necessary, but that's pretty much all my questions. I thank you. You answered
Thank you.
everything. I'll yield back.
Scott?
So, obviously, when we're talking regional detention, obviously the cost benefits to buying this property and making it regional detention, we would never meet that. We could not justify buying that, making it regional detention, because there's not enough to protect out there, honestly. Let's just be honest. Second thing is, when we talk about rural broadband, that's a problem across this entire country. They're trying to figure out how to get internet into these communities where people want to live in the country. So that's a problem they're having across the country. They're trying to figure out if they put it at a school and make sure you can have it at the hospitals, whatever. So that the suppliers, there's just not enough people out there to pay for what it costs to get that kind of internet service. When we talk about our drainage that we passed a year ago, I would tell you we watered it down to get it passed, because if not, we would have some of the teeth in it that we needed tonight. So when development complains that we can't develop if you do these things, but then they show up in a couple months later and say, well, we want to develop, but we want to use the things that you already have in place. Well, this site would be easily developed if we wouldn't have had to water down our drainage ordinance to pass it, because we would have had fill mitigation in bigger inundation areas that the parish recognizes. So if we would have been able to do those things without the development community saying this is not good, well, then we'd be able to develop this site. So, you know, you can argue it on one side, but now you're back on the other side. So which one do you want? And that's just my own personal opinion. So, Mr. Wainwright, will Full Spectrum help this facility right here? Or is it still the mitigation part of it that we're having a problem with? If we go to Full Spectrum design on this property, is that going to help?
This site would be subject to full spectrum design in terms of its pond that serves the purpose of retaining runoff waters, peak and post development. The problem, and I think I heard Mr. Gale say he would be more than happy to design the site to the 100-year floodplain stipulation. What I think he's saying there, I would interpret it as meet your field mitigation policy, which applies inside the 100-year floodplain, not outside of it, because this is a natural storage area and deserving of being protected. That would be that would make this site developable at that point.
So we would not need to add a stipulation. So when I say full spectrum, I mean from 1 year all the way, or is that already in the ordinance?
We don't need that. This site
Okay.
will do a runoff management plan where it runs up, like I say, up against a bit of an issue is its field mitigation only applies in the floodplain, 100-year floodplain. They're not in it. They should be in it. And we need that little bit. I think that's what he said they would be willing to do. At that point, we would be able to have their engineers design the site. They'll probably oversize the pond a little bit and take that volume of water that would normally sit here on this land. They'll obviously compact it, put it a little deeper, and you know, make the same amount of storage available as before. It won't look the same, but it'll be there, and it should work the same for the surrounding properties.
So the stipulation would be to add the field mitigation into this site for the 100-year floodplain.
I would go.
So
yes,
I would
think
make that
meet the
stipulation.
intention.
Mr. Gadd?
Well, let me attempt to dissuade you from doing that right now. Right now, the only motion we have is a motion to deny the rezoning. So it'd be
Okay.
very hard to.
I got you.
I think that motion needs to be dealt with first.
Okay.
And if that gets denied, and we move on from there, at that point, a motion to rezone with stipulations would be appropriate, and then we could amend that to add stipulations then.
All right, Mr. Wainwright, as part of our ordinance that we passed, we required the letters that leave gravity drainage to come through the parish first. I think there was a small line in there that said gravity drainage, your letters will come through the parish so that we can review them before you. So we're still going to look at it even though it's gravity drainage's letter, correct?
Yes, sir. At this point, gravity drainage works up under engineering to work on these sites at the same time. That's become our normal process after the ordinance, so they'll be incorporated into the review process. The letter now really just goes to Tim and them's office, and if there's an issue, they work it out.
I was glad for that small print. So, Mott Road was mentioned. So they said water used to never go over Mott Road. Obviously, you've been around a little while. So is that a true statement that before the RV park, Mott Road didn't cover, or is that?
I wouldn't know the answer to that. I can't answer that. I don't know for certain, so I would be speculating and not. I shouldn't try to make an answer to that.
I got you. What about, so have you had any reports of issues, or that's the same issues before and after the RV park that you've heard out there all these years?
Personally not, and I'm not saying there's none. I just personally have not received any calls about before or after issues. I think what you see here is backwater, most likely from any major rain event. Looks at this topography, you're right there at the area where the land gets real flat and falling off into the, it surely stacks up in these areas and begins to back up on major events. And one development typically not the big issue is the cumulative effect of a lot of developments.
Last question that deals in the big picture things. Do you recommend that we look back into our inundation areas? Because we understand where we have flooding beyond the flood maps. Do you think our ordinance should get a little deeper into our inundation area so we don't have to hash this kind of situation out like we did tonight when it comes to how to mitigate?
Well, there's always an opportunity to really look at some things. There's also a lot of things with statewide initiatives and larger scale things going on to remap floodplains, FEMA and stuff. And what you're looking at is modern technology is so much more accurate than it used to be. And this is a case where you can just see that going on. And I think the maps will be regenerated in time, and these sort of issues at the fringe where we transition from floodplain to non-floodplain will be, they'll get more and more accurate over time. We really shouldn't overly concern ourselves with it yet. If we see a big trend in this direction, I suppose we can bring something back to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
I call a
President.
question.
Second. We have a call to question. The motion on the floor is to do any discussion on call to question? All right, well, the motion on the floor as it stands is to deny rezoning, and I have a second on that. Ms. Kathy, can we do a roll call vote on that?
Yes, sir. This will be a reverse roll call vote. Mrs. Trimming?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. McMillan?
No.
Ms. Mayo?
No.
Mr. Latour?
No.
Mr. Landry?
No.
Mr. Guillory?
No.
Mr. Guidry?
No.
Mr. Farnum?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Breen?
No.
Mr. Barris?
Yes.
Mr. Angelpont?
Yes.
And Mr. Abshire?
No.
Motion failed with 4 yeas and 10 nays. So the rezoning was not denied.
So right now, the proper course would be to receive a new motion, and I would recommend the motion be at this point a motion to approve the rezoning with stipulations.
So, so the new stipulations I would like to add is.
Well, make the motion first. Motion to allow rezoning, approve rezoning with stipulations.
Motion to allow rezoning with stipulations.
Second.
Go ahead, Mr. Scott, start adding.
So now we can add the stipulation. So I would like to add to the stipulation that it be required to, the runoff management plan, that it would require that it goes to the 100-year floodplain mitigation process. I would also like to discuss having a gated community like we would do with a lot of these larger facilities that we've been discussing, so that it does have more of that upscaled feel and, you know, kind of give the neighbors and them a little bit more security feel behind it and stuff. So I would like to know if Mr. Gale could speak on behalf of that. If we could get, the access would have to be changed, but maybe a gated community.
Mr. Gabb.
If you don't mind.
Yes.
Right now, the motion you've added a motion to add a stipulation with the floodplain. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
We can vote on it, take care.
So right now, the motion is to amend, and that will be debated now, to add the stipulation of the floodplain, the increased floodplain requirement standards. So that would be the motion you're debating right now.
So we have the motion to approve rezoning with the stipulations of a 100-year floodplain added addition.
Right now,
We
you're
have a
only.
second.
Right now, you're only taking a vote or discussing.
Do we have any discussion on that motion?
The amendment.
On the amendment. Do we have any discussion on the amendment? No. We'll do a roll call vote on that as well?
I don't
Do we
think
have
need to
any
know.
objection to it? Hearing none, that carries. Now, Mr. Scott.
All right, Mr. Gale, would y'all have a problem with a gated community to give the neighbors in that area?
No problem whatsoever.
All right.
But if the entrance does end up, if it's viable to go to the west, it may not be as practical as it goes to the south, but certainly.
Okay, so even if it goes to the west, would you be willing to put it at goods? Because now you're still going to, other areas and stuff. It's still gonna make it a nicer feel. It give it that look that maybe we're looking
Sure.
for the community.
And I guess my only concern is that because it would be going through a commercial development, we may not be able to put the gate immediately at the road. You may have to put it at the entranceway to the actual development, somewhere in there. We can accommodate it, it just may not give you the exact look you're looking for, because we'll be closing off a parking lot.
Well, some of the problems that we've discussed with the sheriff is the access to the
Sure.
locations, and the commercial part of it would access it very easily. So I think having a gated community, wherever you put that gate, would keep that traffic from just flowing in and out of there, because that's a lot of transit traffic through there. So
I have authority
would
to do
add
that.
the stipulation that we have a gated community, no matter where the location of the driveway ends up.
Second that.
We have any discussion on the additional amendment? Do we have any objection to the additional? Hear none, that carries.
Mr. Beard?
Are you finished, Mr. Scott?
Yes, I'm finished.
Any further discussion? Mr. Farnum?
I would make that motion that the access be granted from the west only.
Additional stipulation. Do we have any discussion on that one?
Second.
Mr. Landry?
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I would agree with, but if he gets in DOTD or somebody tells him he can't put it there, well then,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, he did what he could, and
Yeah.
they're only gonna be able to propose it. He isn't gonna have the final say whether he can do it or not. If DOT says, no, you're not gonna do that, and it's gotta go out the other way, I mean, hey, we have no control over that whatsoever.
I withdraw my second.
I mean, you are willing to try, and you're gonna make that as part of your proposal, and the staff, I mean, I'm sure y'all are gonna get with Tim and whoever with the parish, and it'll be passed on to the state. I mean, the state's, who's gonna make that decision if it does go out that other direction, Tim? Would that be you, or is that gonna be the state?
I would say it's more than likely it's going to fall under the DOTD jurisdiction, going out to the west.
And I mean, flip a coin on what, I mean, they may not have a problem with it, but
It just depends on what happens as DOTD retains jurisdiction off the interstate access. So even if you're transitioning onto a parish road like this, I think they have 1,500 feet.
I think there's a pavement change where the jurisdiction changes.
Okay. And
Mr. Farnum? Mr. Bear?
Who do we have? Tim, Mr. Connor, you may be able to help. I think our maintenance starts somewhere in here on that Toomey Road, right?
That looks about right.
So then, therefore, we would be over that ingress egress decision, right? Or is that
depends
just
on
the
where
maintenance?
It's going to be close, depends on where his driveway comes out. I'm not exactly sure. It's going to be close.
Okay.
you still pulled your second, right, Jeff? Mr. Barris?
Well, without knowing for sure, I mean, I don't want to, you know, paint them in a corner, but I mean, I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Do not
My
have a
second,
second on your extra stipulations. Do you have any further discussion, Mr. Farnum?
Tim, if the access point is on a parish road, do we have to say so? I mean, that's what
I'm asking.
Mr. Barris was getting at. Or is there a buffer off of, onto our roads where DOTD still has some say-so in the matter? That's what Mr. Gale was alluding to, I think was a 1,500 feet.
Right. Any development within a quarter of a mile of a state route, this DOTD could ask for a traffic impact.
And the state route starts where the old Highway 90 private road, where the little
I think where the frontage roads tie in.
wishbone-looking thing starts.
Where the frontage roads tie in, just to that south of that, just not very far, then that's where state, I believe, jurisdiction takes over.
So the gas station is actually on a parish road.
There's two gas stations. I'm not sure which one he's referring to.
That south one is the
south
one
one?
that you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we will agree to stipulate to pursue a westward access regardless of who has jurisdiction over it. And subject to whatever agency, whether it's parish or DOT approving it, then we'll go to the west. And part of this, though, is we don't even know what it's gonna look like until you start doing the drainage and the retention and that sort of thing, as to whether or not that's possible. But to the extent that it's possible, we'll stipulate to that.
Yeah, you know, the two biggest things I have heartburn with this are, number one, drainage.
Okay.
And number two is the traffic.
Okay.
This quantity of cars going down that very, very rural road is just ridiculous in my mind. So anything that pushes these cars out of their neighborhood and keeps the traffic off of that neighborhood is a benefit to everybody. I rest.
Mr. McMillan?
Mr. Gale, like the guy you represented, is he on this block? Are we talking about the road coming through here? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it further to the north where you're talking about the west road?
He does own that convenience store, and the short answer is I'm not sure where it would have to go.
Is he on these woods?
I think so.
Okay, so you're talking about either north, but this would be more on a parish road here.
Correct. And keep in mind what we're having to do, in order to go to the west, we're gonna have to cross the gravity drainage lateral. And so that's another thing we gotta take into consideration.
Do you rest, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
McMillan?
President.
Mr. Farnum?
Alan, the gravity drainage ditch that runs through almost the entire length of this property, if this is to be developed, are they required to give up the gravity drainage easement that's needed to maintain that ditch? I mean, we've got a standard on footage on both sides of the ditch, the slope of the ditch, everything about the ditch. Are they required to then give up that amount of property for the maintenance of that ditch?
Yeah, on the part of the, yes, sir, on the part of the property that joins the lateral, there would be a right-of-way requirement.
Pretty much the entire western border of this property borders on a gravity drainage ditch.
Yes, sir. There's significant
Throughout
stretch.
the whole zigzag and everything. So that amount, and it's, I don't know, 25, 30 feet, something like that, outside of the ditch that's required to be maintained as an easement, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, there'll be a right-of-way
Arrest.
requirement.
Mr. Landry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to verify, Ms. Kathy, because I'm not, the two, are we still missing? You didn't specify about the access going that direction, did you, or did you?
I did
You
not
talked about the
specify.
gate.
I just want the gated, whatever we end up with, it's gotta be gated, because I just wanna vote on that and make sure we take care of that, then we can deal with that where.
We did vote on that.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, we did
Oh,
that,
then I'm
but
good.
I don't think it actually specifies he needs to try to make it go in that other direction.
No, that is not part of it.
It never passed.
Why don't, can you,
Right now, Ms.
I made a motion, and no. they
We
seconded
covered
it.
his.
well, yeah, but yours was,
If I may, Ms.
Make
Landry.
Yours was all or nothing, and
Make it
yeah, and
different.
you didn't get a second.
Now, anything less than that's,
If I may, I can
Nothing
restate,
anyway.
I could attempt
Yes,
to
please,
restate
Mr. Gadd, restate the additional.
the motion that is on the floor right now is a motion to allow the rezoning with the notice stipulations and the additional stipulations of a requirement of gated access into the development and application of increased standards applicable to the 100-year floodplain. That's the motion at hand right now.
And we changed the words to where it's a gated access, possibly to the, I don't know what direction that is, but
Right now, there's,
Make it a third stipulation.
well, right now, there are no other stipulations, and that's.
so we need to do another one.
If you're gonna add anything else, it has to be done as a
Well,
motion.
yeah, I think that was everybody's intent here, so then, yeah, I would make another motion on a stipulation that the traffic, if at all possible, does not use Cormier Road. He tries to
second.
use a different access, if at all possible.
We do have a second on your motion. Do we have any discussion on that?
I just hate that.
Mr. Guidry?
Thank you.
Any objection?
I have one question. At all possible,
All right,
I would
Mr.
just
Scott.
rather say west. I mean, because at all possible, who's deciding? We gotta decide on, because DOTD, I'll tell you, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I mean, we just put it through ours on our Paris Road, through them trees, build a bridge if it's a lateral. You just gotta do it.
What I'm saying is that he will try to go that direction. If DOT says he can or whatever, it's not gonna kill the project. He'll be able to come another way. Now, at that point, maybe he gets with Mr. Connor, and Mr. Connor may say, well, okay, I'll let you come out this way, but maybe you gotta put a turn lane in. I don't know what you're gonna come up with. Go ahead. He
Mr.
wants
Connor.
to say something.
Just a point of clarification, if he does come out to the west and it is on a parish road, we can grant him a driveway. It may be that DOTD may still require traffic impact because they're within the vicinity of their route, but we could grant them the driveway out to the west if it falls on the parish portion of the road that we have jurisdiction over.
We do have a motion and a second on the additional stipulation. Do we have any objection? Hear none, that stipulation carries. So now we're gonna go back to a roll call vote, right, Mr.
On the
Mr.
main
Gabb?
motion.
On the main motion with the additional stipulations.
Correct.
And
Roll call, Ms. Kathy.
Mr. Abshire?
Yes.
Mr. Angelpont?
Yes.
Mr. Barris?
No.
Mr. Breen?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Farnum?
no.
Mr. Guidry?
Yes.
Mr. Guillory?
Yes.
Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Mr. Latour?
Yes.
Ms. Mayo?
Yes.
Mr. McMillan?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
And Mrs. Trimming?
Yes.
Motion carried, 12 to 2. 12 yeas, 2 nays.
7 carries with the additional stipulations.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Item 8. Consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application, 136 Vincent Drive in Ward 4 to rezone from light commercial C1 to general commercial C2 to allow commercial development used for car sales. I need a motion to approve or a motion to deny rezoning.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Of a motion to approve and a second. Motion by Mr. Abshire and a second by Mr. Anderpont. Do we have any discussion? Mr. Bears?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about this project. Is
The applicant here?
the applicant here? She want my hand to drink.
Name and address for the record, sir.
Name's George Pauley. I live at 516 North Lebanon Street, Sulphur. But what I was wanting to do, I was trying to get a license and go to the auction and buy vehicles. To do this, the property has to be zoned C2 instead of C1, even though I'm looking at getting 1 or 2 vehicles at a time. You know, I'm not trying to compete against Billy Navarre, you know, so.
Thank goodness. Okay, I just, and I'm trying to picture Vincent Drive.
It's right behind ABC daycare.
Oh.
100 yard north of Fisherman's.
Fisherman's, okay. Okay, I'm good.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we have a motion to approve rezoning by Mr. Abshire and a second by Mr. Anderpont. Any objection? Hearing none, that item carries. Item 9, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application, 900 block of Tallowood Road in Ward 3 to rezone from single-family residential, R1, to mixed
to
residential,
rezone.
R2,
Second.
to allow residential development, one duplex on each lot. I have a motion by Mr. Scott to approve and a second by Mr. Breen. Any discussion? Any objection? 9 carries. Approved. Item 10, consideration of adopting an ordinance rescinding ordinance number 5984.
Move on 10.
Which ordered
Second.
demolition of the manufactured home on one house at 2530 Old Highway 90. I have a motion by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. Abshire. Any discussion? Any objection? 10 carries. 11, consideration of adopting a resolution
Move
approving
on
the
to
following items related to
Second.
Water
All bullets.
District Number 12 of Ward 3. A, suspend for an indefinite period of authority of the Board of Commissioners and appoint the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury as the governing authority. B, place responsibility of the day-to-day management of the district under the Department of Public Works. And C, adopt policies for the district related to the billing and collection. I have a motion by Mr. Scott on all bullets and a second by Mr. Breen. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. 12, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the amendment of the Burton Shipyard Road Maintenance Cooperative Endeavor Agreement to extend the term until June 30th, 2019.
Move on 12.
Second.
A motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Breen. We do have discussion. Mr. Bears.
Mr. Connor, can you tell me where, how much more time do they need down there at the end of that road? Or what's the,
Mr. Bears, they've indicated that they should be through this summer, which I believe is when we're extending the term until June the 30th.
have they kept up with the logs? I mean, just all the maintenance and the monitoring of that road? I mean, everything's
To the best of my
fine?
knowledge, they have, yes, sir.
I'm sorry?
To the best of my knowledge, they have.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Any objection? That item carries. 13, consideration of adopting a resolution
Move on
approving the
13.
submittal of the request for the proposal of the Louisiana High School Athletics Association to host the 2020 LHSAA March Madness basketball tournaments at the Burton Coliseum. I have a motion by Mr. Guidry and a second by Mr. McMillan. We do have discussion. Mr. Guidry.
Yes, it's Mr. Jason. Jason, could you come up for just a minute? The question I have, did we do a proposal for both the boys and girls, or was it just for the boys?
Name and position with the parish, please.
Jason Barnes, Director, Burton Coliseum. Details are still being worked out on that, but there's a good possibility we'll be trying for both.
Good. That would be great if we could get it back here, both the boys and girls. Thank you, Jason.
Any further questions for Jason Blaze up here? We have any objection? That item carries. 14, consideration of adopting a
Move on.
resolution
Move
for the
in all
following
bullets.
items as
Second.
requested by the Office of Juvenile Justice Services. A, approving the submittal of continuation application to the Louisiana Supreme Court for the Families in Need Services Assistance Program. B, approving an agreement for participation in the Title Federal Foster Care Reimbursement Program. And C, approving the submittal of the continuation grant application for the case manager and counseling services to assist victims of child abuse. We have a motion on all bullets by Mr. Anderpont and a second by Mr. Guillory. Any discussion? Any objection? 14 carries. 15, consideration of adopting resolutions where applicable for each of the following items as requested by Human Resources Department. A,
Move on 15.
approving a memorandum agreement for the Certified Clinical Medical Assistance Training
All
Program.
bullets.
B, approving the customized training agreement for the Certified Power Lineman Training Program. And C, acknowledgeable the submittal of minutes of Calcasieu Parish Human Services Advisory Board for a meeting held on December 18, 2018. I have a motion by Mr. Barrows, all bullet, and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objection? 15 carries. 16, take appropriate action by resolution to fill in a vacancy position in the Registrar of Voters, Calcasieu Parish, created by the retirement of Miss Angie Quinathan. A, approve the Registrar of Voters Ad Hoc Interview Committee report dated April 11, 2019 as follows. Received introductory statements by qualified applicants and interview and recommended all 4 candidates as finalists. And B, consideration of continuing into executive session to discuss the candidates for a said vacancy. I have a motion on both bullets.
16 item A, and then we'll go into executive session afterwards. So I'll do that one after we do the interviews. Thank you, Mr. President. I need a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Before, I had a motion by Mr. Mr. Gildery and a second by Mr. McMillan.
I don't know what we would do without you, Mr. McMillan.
Boy, isn't that true? I can think of a couple of things.
Yeah.
Unless a few cameras.
Mr. President, if I may, and if I could, I think the agenda item is written, and I think the way we're going to handle it is that both items can be taken up as on the same motion.
Then a motion on both bullets. Thank you, Mr. President.
But before we do the vote, we will have the presentations given. So I apologize if there was any confusion on there.
Before opening up for any discussion, I will have 4 applicants make 2-minute introductory statements to the full jury. Once those introductions have been concluded, I will take a vote to proceed into executive session. I will now call on Ms. Kim Fontenot to address the jury.
Good afternoon. Today, as you face the difficult task of selecting a registrar, I humbly ask that you consider the following. Having worked for 15 years in the registers of office, I was named Chief Deputy by Angie Quinathan, who trusted fully in my knowledge and abilities and character. I am the only applicant who has obtained my CERA certification, which is Certified Elections Registration Administrator. I am the only applicant who has experience in canvassing, provisional ballot process, reapportionment, and using GIS mapping to ensure that the population growth is properly assigned to the correct voting precincts and districts. I am the only applicant who has election experience working directly with the Secretary of State's office, the Clerk of Court, city and parish planning, the DA's office, and numerous other entities. I am the only applicant who has assisted in organizing voter registration outreach programs held throughout the community, including local schools, churches, and nursing homes. I am the only candidate who is fully prepared today to lead the staff in the upcoming major elections. The Louisiana governor and presidential race have state and national impact. Now more than ever, the registrar must be prepared to keep the integrity of the voting process intact and retain the trust of the voters by understanding legalities of elections. Finally, I am truly passionate about the work of this office. It has been more than just a job opportunity to me. The past 15 years have trained me to be ready for today. While this transition is happening much sooner than anybody had expected, I know that I am prepared and I will be honored to serve as your next registrar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fontenot. I'll now call Ms. Crystal Long. Name and address, please.
Crystal Long, 2448 Quail Ridge Drive, Moss Bluff, Louisiana, 70611. Good evening, and thank you for the honor of addressing you. I'm a professional librarian. I was born and raised in Moss Bluff and graduated from McNeese and LSU. One of my minors was history, with my coursework focusing on U.S. history and government. When I was a child, I got my first taste of parish government when I visited my grandmother, Maxine Long, at her place of employment, the clerk of court. After living and working in another state for close to a decade, I decided it was time to come home to be closer to my family. Information is my currency, even as it assumes various forms like article abstracts or website URLs or the annual canvas of voters or voter education programs. I am not daunted by the challenges of the position of registrar of voters. Instead, I am excited to embrace a new information currency. Throughout my career, I have leveraged social media and the most current technology to build support for programs, to teach, and to create connected communities. The registrar of the future will have to embrace the new generations of voters and their preferred methods of communication to meet them at their points of concern and interest. We are in a brave new world with bold challenges. My education and experiences have positioned me to meet these challenges with confidence. While I cannot offer you years of experience as an election official, I can offer you a wealth of work experience as an information professional with project and program management and a unique understanding of technology and organization. Most of all, I want to encourage others to embrace and exercise their franchise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Mr. Thad Mayo.
My name's Thad Mayo. I reside at 1822 2nd Avenue, Lake Charles, 70601. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation to meet with you today. I'm very happy to be here. I've been married for 29 years. I'm the father of 2 children, Chandler and Cooper. I'm a proud, lifelong resident of Calcasieu Parish, where I registered to vote on my 18th birthday. After graduating with a Bachelor in Science degree in business from Centenary College, I returned to the area and since then have worked in Calcasieu Parish. That work included knowledge of maps, roads, district and ward lines, and keeping the land title and public records. I have served as president of the Lake Charles Rotary Club and Scoutmaster of Troop 5. I'm an Eagle Scout and a lifelong member of the First United Methodist Church here in Lake Charles. I'm a qualified candidate because of my experience in managing small local business. I have the integrity needed to oversee one of our most treasured rights, privileges, and responsibilities, voting. I'm very interested in serving as a Calcasieu Parish Registrar of Voters. I feel very strongly about the right that the men and women have fought and died to preserve and to continue to guard today. I especially want our youth to know the importance of this right. Soon our veterans will be gone, and we must educate the next generation about why voting is of utmost importance. I have ideas about increasing voter turnout, and I have enthusiasm to lead our parish into a new phase that will include high visibility, education of our citizens, and increased availability for the registering to vote. Thank you again for allowing me to speak and address you this afternoon.
Mayo. Mr. Russell Price.
My name is Russell R. Price, and I live at 1319 Moss Street here in Lake Charles, 70601. I grew up in the city. My parents were the late Dr. and Mrs. Vivian Hugh Price. I'm an Eagle Scout like Dad. I graduated with honors from Lake Charles High School, McNeese State University, Louisiana State University, and at Mississippi State University, I received my PhD in American history. All right. I have 24 years of professional teaching experience at the secondary and university levels in U.S. history. I have molded hundreds of students to practice their citizenship rights and responsibilities, an important part of which is voter participation. I've managed over 500 classes in my educational life of students to ensure that they succeed in society. Why am I interested in becoming the Calcasieu Parish Registrar of Voters? I want to continue my public service, which I've taken seriously since my scouting days. I want to bring a new perspective to the office as an educator, focusing on integrity and efficiency. I want to raise the public's awareness of voting responsibilities and to encourage registration of new voters in the parish. You have 4 highly qualified people who want to be the register of voters. A tough decision to make. I have the highest academic credentials. I have the most professional teaching experience, and I have a lifetime of public service commitment, which will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Again, I have a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry to receive report and now proceed into executive session. Did we have any discussion? Any objection? We are in executive session.